Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my October reading wrap up. Y'all, I cannot believe that the last 2 months of the year are sneaking up on us like this. How did this happen? And how have I still not reached my reading challenge goal? Honestly, am I gonna hit it at this point? I don't know. I really need to buckle down for the rest of November and December because I'm at I want to say 203 or something like that books read, and my goal is 300. It's gonna take some doubling up to get there, but that's fine. That's besides the point. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about all the books that I read in the month of October. But before we get into it, I have to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Aura, and it's a really important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from National Public Data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include things like your full name, your address, date of birth, phone number, and most importantly, social security number. And members of the hacker group reportedly have released all of this information for free online. You know, I've always been uncomfortable with how easily accessible personal information is online. The fact that my phone number, my address, my email is out there, it bothers me. And now with this massive data breach, it feels like our privacy is even more at risk than ever. If you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a really big wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable than you are online right now. I have found a way to feel more secure online, and that's by using Aura. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, my social security number, my email on the dark web. They're gonna let me know if anyone tries to use this information to take out credit cards in my name or bank accounts. That has happened to me before. Let me tell you, it is really not fun. They give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen, and they also provide a bunch of other features within the app. You can go to my link, aura.com/chandler.ainsley, to try 14 days for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if your personal information is exposed. I highly recommend that you do this right now because National Public Data is not going to do anything to help you, and they're probably not even going to face the repercussions for the leak. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches. And if you don't want to either, you can go to, again, aura.com/chandler.ainsley. Try Aura for yourself. It's given me peace of mind to know that even if my data is out there, I have a powerful tool watching my back. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Now let's get into all of the books that I read in this month of October. Apologies, by the way, if the lighting goes in and out. I don't know what it is about the end of every month, but I always seem to pick the most overcast day to film these videos in my car, and we're gonna have some shadows, we're gonna have some bright moments. Maybe it'll add to the excitement of everything, right? Also exciting is the fact that I read 19 books this month. The month is actually not over. I think I'm gonna probably get to about 25 books by the time the month is over, but I have 19 books to talk to y'all about, some of which I have not talked to you about before in other videos, so I think this is gonna be exciting. First up, we have Pachinko. This book was not what I expected, actually. This is a multi-generational story about a Korean family and the consequences of one family member's actions and how moving to Japan kind of affects their family and intergenerational trauma and multi-generational story. This all kind of takes place during World War II and after World War II. Again, a big heavy emphasis on the racism that Koreans faced in Japan and just kind of the relations between Japan and Korea at this time. I learned a lot from reading this book, but I also think this book kind of assumes that you have a lot of context for this time period and the relationship between Korea and Japan. I also kind of feel like the characters were more like vehicles for ideas rather than full-fledged characters that you could relate to. I mean, obviously I'm not going to deeply relate to these characters because I've never been through something like this. I feel like the actual emotions that the characters were going through weren't super well defined. You can obviously assume emotions for them based on the things that are happening to them. For me, the combination of not a lot of emphasis on the emotions and taking time to really sit with those with the characters and the lack of context I had going into this made it to where I didn't feel a connection with this story as much as I wanted to, which is definitely just a me thing and doesn't mean that this is a bad book by any stretch of the imagination. Clearly it is very well researched and does a lot. I mean, I learned a ton from reading this book, but it kind of leaves me in a weird place where I'm not entirely sure how to rate this one. It's given me a lot of things to think about, but I don't know ultimately what I would rate this one. So I'm going to leave it unrated. I'm glad I got the opportunity to read this one. It's one that's been on my radar for a while. I feel like I keep getting it off of hold from my library and just not taking the time to listen to it. This time I did though. I'm glad I did it, and I'll talk about it probably more in depth in the video that I'm reading this book for, or that I read this book for. All right, next up we have another book that I read for a list video. This one is one that I probably would have picked up on my own, but it would have taken a while for me to get to it, kind of like Pachinko, just because of the length of it. That would be A Promised Land by Barack Obama. This is Obama's autobiography, and I feel like this one gets a ton of buzz, which makes sense considering the list that I read this one for. It's the most popular books of the past decade kind of thing. And this one, the audiobook, but I definitely think it was worth the listen. This one really follows Obama in his infancy in politics leading up to the presidential election and kind of goes through his first term in office. Wow, it was pretty illuminating. I have to say the thing that I liked most about this was getting to see Obama through his own eyes and to see what events led him to becoming a politician. I like that even though this is kind of told from his own perspective, I consider it to be a fairly unflinching look at some of his past choices. He definitely regrets some of the things he does. I think is able now to kind of poke fun at his personality as well, which I found refreshing and interesting. Again, the portion of the book that I really liked was that kind of beginning portion where we understand his childhood, his marriage to Michelle, and the events leading up to running for office. The part that kind of lost me a little bit was his actual first term in office. It's not that I didn't enjoy that part of the book, but that definitely was less interesting to me. I think all of us can probably go back, read the history of what happened and the choices that were made, and I guess sure you could say it's interesting to hear it from his perspective, but I cared less about that and cared more about him as a person. I find the lives of public figures like this to be deeply interesting and fascinating, and I would have preferred honestly just to read that part of the book. That being said, it was a good book. I enjoyed it. I will be curious to see what the second book looks like, because he says that this is like the first one and he's going to put out a second one about his second term in office. That one is one I would be more interested in, because I think he would probably also talk about what happened when Trump got in office and kind of the way that America changed before that election. And I liked this. I think it was a nonfiction book about a president, so again, interesting things to be gleaned. Was this going to be 100% the truth? No, because I don't think there is like a 100% accurate truth when it comes to telling your own story, but it was interesting just reading through his own eyes. I don't rate nonfiction, but I enjoyed this, and the audiobook obviously is a great way to consume the story because he narrates it himself and he has a beautiful voice. That man does have a beautiful voice. I don't think that many people can argue with that. So moving on to a book that couldn't be more different, A Touch of Gold and Madness. This was a book that I read for a KU fantasy romance video, which I'll link in the description. I'm going to try to do a better job going forward for my wrap-ups, linking some of the videos that I made for that month, so you can go back and get more in-depth thoughts and feelings if you'd like. But A Touch of Gold and Madness was an interesting romantasy, and that it is very dystopian, and I don't think I've ever read a dystopian romantasy before. I can't say it was good, but it's definitely different. So this one follows Gray and Griffin, and in the society, sort of an apocalyptic situation that happens. There's this big explosion and a bunch of people on Earth die, and now everybody is kind of reeling from this and trying to figure out a new way of doing things and a new way of living and surviving. And we also find out that it's not just humans living in this society. There's also people with elemental magic and kinetic magic, and the elementals are the ones that cause this big explosion, this big event. I can't remember the actual name of it. I'm just gonna call it Doomsday. There was a Doomsday event. The elementals apparently caused it, and now the elementals and kinetics are kind of at war, and the heroine of our story is a kinetic who is trying to hunt down the elemental prince and murder him because he is apparently the one that like caused this big explosion. So it's kind of about that. She's trying to hunt him down. I will say that part of the storyline kind of goes away quickly, and then it's mostly these two trying to understand the other person's point of view better, if that makes sense. Kinetics and elementals don't fully understand each other, and she doesn't end up murdering him, of course, because like that would prevent the story from taking place, and so they kind of, you know, talk things out, and we find out more things that we didn't know about the society. And I think what I didn't like about this was that I feel like at the beginning it was set up to be this like really brutal enemies to lovers, because this guy literally killed so many of her people and has done some like really dark stuff, and he's also dealing with his own demons. Like I really thought that the enemies to lovers would be stronger here, but that kind of goes away too quickly for me, and I felt like there wasn't enough to keep me super interested in the story. I will give it to the author. The magic system is obviously very cool. I don't think I read enough books with like kinetic and elemental magic, like especially at war with each other. Like that's an interesting concept for sure, but I wanted more, you know? I definitely needed more from this. Another book I needed more from, but not in a sexual sense because there was far too much weird smut in this book, Phantasma. This is another romantasy book. It's about a necromancer and a phantom, Ophelia and Blackwell. Of course, Ophelia is the necromancer, Blackwell's the phantom. Our girl Ophelia essentially enters into this carnival, sort of like competition style thing at this old mansion in, I want to say, Louisiana. At the beginning of the story, Ophelia's mother passes away, and we find out that the house that she thought was paid off is not in fact paid off, and so Ophelia and her little sister are trying to come up with money quick so that they can stay in their childhood home. To do this, Ophelia's little sister enters into this competition called Phantasma. So she goes to this house to find her sister, and while she's there, she realizes she has to enter into the competition to find her sister. While she's in the competition, she meets this guy named Blackwell. He's a really sexy phantom who she wants to fuck. And do they fuck? Yes, they do. Maybe a little too much. He's a little bit creepy, and I didn't like the relationship dynamics here, so I couldn't enjoy the story. I'm also not really into these kinds of competition stories. Like, I like competitions in sort of an assassin-y way or in a dystopian way, but not in a circusy, Caraval haunted housey sort of way. This just didn't work for me personally in that aspect. And then the romance was just very much 0 to 60 and 3.5. You know what I'm saying? Like, why were they fucking so quick? Why did he profess his love? It felt a little bit unrealistic, and I'm sure you could magic away the explanation, but that's not enough for me, frankly. With the romance, I needed it to be a little bit more in depth, okay? But if you are someone who lives on vibes alone, like my friend Miss Olivia from Olivia Reads a Latte, you'll probably enjoy the story. A lot of people enjoyed this. I just was less than impressed as someone who cares about the relationship development, okay? It was not developed, so Moving on to the last book that had developed relationships and little else. The Wraith King. Wow, now that I'm thinking about it, like that video was kind of a flop. Like I did not find a single book that I really rode hard for. The Wraith King is about Una and Galaya. She is a light fae and he is a dark fae. Una gets captured by Galaya's father, who is the king at the beginning of the book of the dark fae, and he is going to murder Una. He like randomly finds her in the woods and he's like, you know what, let's kill the bitch. That doesn't happen. Una escapes with the help of Galaya, and now the two fae factions are at war because nobody wants their daughter to be stolen and murdered, you know, even if it didn't happen, ultimately not very cool. So the light fae and the dark fae are kind of at war until Galaya ends up killing his father and capturing Una and marrying Una and becoming in charge of all the fae. That's much of a spoiler. I feel like that's kind of in the description of the book, and also it ultimately doesn't matter because like the plot of this book doesn't fucking matter. This story is really about Una and Galaya kind of like coming together and loving on each other, and it's surprisingly sweet for a book that has a cover like this. Like I thought this was going to give like Cruel Prince levels of enemies to lovers vibes. No. What I'm finding is that like authors just aren't doing enemies to lovers like they used to. They have like an instant attraction for each other. They get to know each other on a personal level. The relationship develops over time. She requests things of him and he's like, of course, babe, like I love you so much. And this is going to be a different kind of marriage. It is, because they're like sickly in love with each other and he just like bends to every whim. And like love that for her. Certainly love that for her. Okay. I'm not speaking ill on that, but it makes for an uninteresting romance. And I believe, I could be wrong here, I think this is the author's first foray into fantasy romance. I mean, the concepts are good. Like I liked the dark fae, light fae, like elements to the story, but I just feel like the fantasy plotline could have been a little bit more interesting. That's all I have to say about that one. It wasn't terrible. And if you want something that feels a little bit more chill, like you want a low stakes romantasy, I think you might like it. The sixth book that I read in the month of October was The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. And wow, I didn't know what this book was going into it. Wasn't really looking to read it because I do not like this author's most famous book. I don't like the message that it sends about disability. So I wasn't really hyped for this. You know, I didn't know what this would be, if this would be some sort of like romance. And you know, there is a romance present, but it is not a romance. This story is about our main character, Alice, who has come over from England after she marries this guy named Bennett, right? She was kind of, I don't want to say an outcast in her family, but her family didn't really understand her spirit and her nature. And so Alice took this like brave opportunity to marry Bennett and move to Kentucky. And so she's living in kind of the country of Kentucky, and she thought that it would be more glamorous than it is for sure. But she's living with Bennett and Bennett's dad in this like old ass house that has porcelain dolls everywhere that belonged to Bennett's mom. And it's just like a shrine to this woman. Alice just can't seem to do anything right? She keeps being compared to Bennett's mom. It's just a toxic living situation. Bennett is not willing to stand up to his dad. The dad is way too controlling about their relationship. They never have sex. Like, it's just not great. So Alice ends up working for this traveling library, brings books to families up in kind of the hills of Kentucky. She does this with a couple of other women who volunteer. There's a woman named Marjorie who comes from a family, I don't want to say ne'er-do-wells, but people who the other people in this like Kentucky town do not like. So she's kind of looked down upon, but Alice and Marjorie become kind of fast friends. And this book is really about them and the other women who, you know, are part of this traveling library, kind of their relationships and navigating sexism and racism kind of during this time period. I really enjoyed this book. I won't lie. The thing that's holding me back from like rating this highly or, you know, really saying I love this book is that there are accusations, people, that this author copied and plagiarized another, because there is a story that is similar, kind of with the Kentucky Traveling Library sort of plotline. So it's like hard to say if I want to like ride hard for this one and give it a really high rating, but this was a very human story. I hate to contrast this with something like Pachinko, which I think has probably more literary merit. I enjoyed the story more because the character emotion was on page. We get in the heads of the characters, understand how they were thinking and feeling. It was just told very differently. And when I'm reading historical fiction, like this is how I like to read it. Again, it doesn't mean that this book's like inherently better than that one, because that's not true, but I just think I enjoyed it a little bit more because I got to really be in the minds of the characters. I did enjoy this book. I listened to it during my walks, the hills of Texas, and I don't know, I kind of felt like one with the characters in the book. So I thought it was a good time. I don't know what I'd rate it, but again, read it for a video and it surprised me, I will say. A book that also surprised me was Five Brothers by Penelope Douglas. This is like if Goldilocks and the Three Bears was more of like a sexual situation, in the sense that our heroine, she has sex with a stranger in the dark, and for the rest of the book she hooks up with different men to see if they were the guy that she hooked up with at the beginning of the book. So she like fucks five brothers, and the last brother that she has sex with is the one where she's like, oh my god, wait, like the imprint of your dong in my cooter is like exactly what I was looking for, because this is like what I had at the beginning of the book. Am I doing a good job at explaining this? Probably not. I think you catch my drift though. It was interesting for sure. This book is set in the same like universe universe as Tris Six Venom, which is Penn's sapphic novel. I just don't really like this world very much. I don't always hate the like wrong side of the tracks versus like upper crust Richie Rich vibe, but I just don't love the execution in this particular like duet or like universe. I don't know how to put it. So I didn't like the setting very much, and then the characters were also kind of annoying. Our heroine, like, I felt for her, but I didn't feel for her enough to really care about her sexual exploits. So it just kind of fell apart for me. Like, the first couple of chapters of this book are actually kind of fucking crazy too. So if you to give it a try, I think you can like read the first couple of chapters on Amazon before like purchasing a book. So maybe do that before giving this one a go. All right, next up we have Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is also a book that I was putting off for quite a while because I thought my dumb little brain can't handle science fiction. I would be incorrect because this book was hardly science fiction and I'm actually not that stupid. So this one follows our main character, Jason Dessen. And at the beginning of the book, Jason is hanging out with his wife and his child, and he is just loving his life. He leaves home briefly to go and meet up with a colleague at a bar to have a little drinky drink, and he does this, and on his way home, he gets kidnapped by someone who forces him into a box. When he wakes up from his drug-induced stupor / sleepy time, he wakes up in a universe or a time where his family just does not exist. His wife, his child are not there, and he slowly starts uncovering the secrets of what might have happened to him, the, I guess, secrets of the multiverse. I don't know, we're gonna put it like that. I don't want to spoil too much of this book because part of what is interesting about it is the mystery involved, but really what this story is not so much focused on the science fiction and like how this came to be, the fact that his like family doesn't exist anymore. It's more about this idea of what a well-lived life looks like. Is it one where you are financially successful and or successful in your career field and are advancing science, or is it more about the people who make up your life? And I think obviously we know which direction it's going to go in with the answer there, but I thought this was pretty fun. Like, it is a very easily accessible science fiction book that I understand why so many people enjoy. When I finished this book, it got me to think not necessarily about what was discussed in this book, but also how I am going to structure that list video going forward, because what I thought I would do was kind of break things up into genre, like let's talk about all the historical fiction, science fiction, all the nonfiction, and now what I'm considering is more of the themes that I am noticing across these books and what makes a book popular, right? And I think this book really showed me that when it comes to human values and the human condition and that sort of thing, books that are popular tend to sort of revolve around that, right? I'm gonna get more nuanced in how I organize things going forward. I don't need to tell you all the details. You're gonna see that video in December, but this book got me to think about that. I mean, I already kind of knew that I valued my family and shit over my career. A little. I mean, I care about my career, but this book I think is supposed to be like relatable and shit, and I don't know what to say. It was good. It was a good time. Ending was a little weak, especially when Jason, I don't want to spoil it, but the ending's a little bit weak, but that's fine. Everything else I thought was pretty enjoyable. It's giving a little bit mystery thriller, a little bit science fiction, a little bit like heartfelt story, so I think people might like this one. Next up, a book that I thought I knew what it was going into it, but really didn't once I picked it up, would be A Dark and Drowning Tide. I talked about this book in the list video that I did for the month of October, where I talked about the 48 most anticipated romances of 2024, according to Goodreads readers, linked in the description down below. This one's about Lorelai and Sylvia, and I was really hyped for this one because it was promised to me as an academic rivals to lovers story. And what I got, unfortunately, was not totally that. It was barely academic, barely rivals, I would say. Mostly just a group of people on a ship trying to stay alive while they find this magical spring that a king has asked them to go and find. I wanted to like this one more than I did. I feel like for me, I talked about this specifically in the list video, I don't really like when stories try to blend too many, in my opinion, disparate elements, right? This could have been a really great academic rivals to lovers story, or it could have been magical expedition type thing. Combining everything just sort of confused me. There was also elements of racism and or xenophobia and like religious persecution a little bit. Like, there were so many elements to the story that I think took away from what this was supposed to be, which was a fantasy romance, ultimately romancy book. Didn't feel the romance very much, and I kind of feel like the fantasy elements were lagging too. This book just really let me down. The cover is gorgeous. It could have been great. It just, the execution just wasn't really it for me. I just think, you know, this is the second book that I picked up from this author, no luck with, so I'm just assuming going forward that this author's work isn't for me, and that's okay. Every book is going to find its audience, and it seems like this author has a very strong and loyal following, people doing fan art for her stuff, so more power to her for sure. It's just like it doesn't work for me, and that's okay. The book that did work for me, because I just love this author, would be The Night We Lost Him by Laura Dave. I can love her brand of mysteries. Her mysteries are not thrilling, which I think is going to be off-putting to a lot of people. This one especially is very much more in the family drama side of things, but it's about our main character, Nora, who is trying to uncover, along with the help of her half-brother Sam, what happened to their dad, Liam. Liam has this house in California. He's like a hotel magnate, kind of complicated, and he has his like personal sanctuary in California on this kind of like rocky cliff facing the beach, and he ends up falling one night, and everyone assumes that it's accidental except for Sam, who hunts down Nora and is like, hey, I don't think our dad like tripped. I think someone pushed him. Like, I think that this was premeditated. Like, I think this was serious. I think we need to look into it, even though the police don't necessarily want to. So Nora and Sam kind of go on a trip and a quest to figure out what happened to their dad and kind of the secrets of their dad's life, because they were half siblings and were raised just completely differently and completely separately. Their dad had multiple marriages. We find out about his marriages, who maybe the true love of his life was, all these different things. And I liked it. I just love stories that slowly uncover information. It all kind of adds up at the end. It doesn't have to be something that is, you know, the most shocking or the most vile, like a thriller, but I don't know. She does such a good job at like weaving in elements that make you really give a shit about the characters. I love her writing. I really do. And I can't remember what the name of her last book was. The Last Thing He Told Me, something like that. Also fantastic. I think they made that one into like an Apple TV series. I'll just pick up everything she writes in the future, because she has such a way with words that I particularly connect with. This is one that I don't know that I'd recommend to a ton of people, because I know people are looking for that like heart-pounding thriller type thing. But if you like mystery sort of family dramas, I think this might be for you. I don't know if I gave this 4 or 5 stars, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Moving on to a book that I finally picked up, a book that I didn't know if I ever would pick up, because I'm not really a big Hunger Games girl, but I picked up The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and then promptly watched the movie. So this book, I'm sure as everyone knows, is about Coriolanus and Lucy. Coriolanus is, you know, Snow or whatever from the original trilogy, and this is kind of his backstory, how he kind of came to be. And it's a little bit about Hunger Games that happened back in the day, kind of at the start of the games in general. It was certainly a book. I don't know that I liked it or loved it, but I certainly didn't hate it. I kind of feel similarly to this one that I did to Pachinko. I really need books to get into the emotions, right? This book, and I think that one, are more focused on using characters to teach lessons and to discuss broader themes than they are to really get in the heads of the characters. And I just think there's multiple different ways to achieve your purposes as a writer. Again, there's no right or wrong way, I think, to achieve your goals, because everyone has different goals when they're writing. It's just, as a reader, I connect more with stories that tend to go deep with the emotions. Probably why I'm a romance reader. I like the emotions. I find those to be important to understanding characters more and understanding themes more. Whereas, again, some authors are more focused on using characters to kind of prove a point and less focused on how the characters feel about what's happening to them, okay? Maybe I'm just woo-woo about it, but the story was interesting to me. On some levels. Like, I did enjoy seeing Coriolanus's character and how he was kind of at war with himself, with whether or not he wanted to like help Lucy or whether he cared more about his own shit. And obviously, I think we all kind of understand that he cares more about himself than he does other people, especially as the events of the book kind of unfold. I will say, and I know this is probably an unpopular opinion, I did prefer the movie to the book. I think because you can see the emotion conveyed on someone's face, it felt like we were closer to the characters than it did when I was reading the book. And sure, the book goes into more depth for certain things, whatever, but I also feel like the pacing and the vibe of the movie was just better than the book. Okay, I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it, and I don't feel any type of way about it. I don't feel bad about that. I just am a movie person. Being a book person, it's weird to enjoy movies more, but that's how I feel a lot of the time. I think there's so many successful adaptations these days, and I am not someone who's like, wait, that's missing from the movie. It's like, if you're communicating the vibe of the book well enough, like the Hating Game movie, this was okay. It was okay. I could probably give it like 3 stars. Moving on to a book that y'all are probably gonna think is crazy that I haven't read yet, or hadn't read up until this point, but Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I don't have any excuses for this one, except for I didn't really want to read it, but I needed to read it for a video, and I'm actually glad that I did. This is my favorite of Jane Austen's work. I actually have read Sense and Sensibility, Emma, something else, can't remember what. Oh, Persuasion. I read Pride and Prejudice, though, and I have to say, maybe between the writing and the way that Rosamund Pike narrated, it's what I feel like it's a banger. It's a classic for a reason. Darcy and Elizabeth, I think, are interesting characters. I liked seeing how their pride and their prejudice kind of like got in the way of them getting together. I liked the yearning a little bit. What I gained from this is just the knowledge of kind of what into the movies and how the different mediums, I guess, interpreted the book, right? Because you can compare the BBC miniseries to like the 2004 adaptation with Keira Knightley. And I found it really interesting. Try to understand what different people liked about different adaptations. That's kind of what I gained from this reading experience. What I have come to the conclusion of is that I don't give a fuck. I like both. I think both are really great. I didn't really understand what people were saying, honestly, when they said that the 2004 version's too melodramatic and like they don't like the way Darcy was interpreted, like he's a little too awkward and whatever. I liked the 2004 version. I also like the BBC adaptation. I don't know. I think that both are great. I think that, again, when it comes to stuff like this, I kind of prefer the movies. I'd rather read I'd rather watch the movies and see the flexing, you know, on the screen rather than kind of reading that into the book. But I did like the book. The book was good. So I don't know what to say here except for I'm glad that I read it. And moving on to a book that I'm honestly not glad that I read. All's Fair in Love and War by Virginia Heath is a historical romance novel about Henry and Georgina. And Georgina at the start of the story is in a rough situation because her mother has passed away and her stepfather is kind of an asshole. He is a part of the military. They've moved around a lot and he is going to unceremoniously dump Georgina onto the steps of a school for governesses because she has no prospects, right? She's not like a titled or landed lady. And so she is actually kind of hyped because she doesn't have to be with her evil stepfather anymore. And she makes a lot of friends along the way at the school. And this doesn't happen for very long, right? This is like the first couple of chapters of the book. Georgina is now looking for her first job, but it's not going well because she has strong moral principles and scruples and things she wants to get accomplished as a governess. Primarily that she does not want to use corporal punishment, and she is a very experiential teacher, right? Like, let's get out in nature and learn about bugs instead of like reading books about them. Lucky for her, after a while of like horrible failed interviews, a captain comes along and is like, hey, I'm in a rough situation. My sister left me with her 3 kids and I need them to be looked after because I'm a captain of, I don't know, Her Majesty's Navy or some shit, and I don't have time to take care of these kids. And she's like, you know what, sure. He's in such a rush, he doesn't really question the way that she's going to teach these kids, and that's kind of where they butt heads whenever she goes to work for him. He is wanting a little bit more structure and discipline. She is wanting to kind of understand the children and work with them rather than against the way that they learn. He also really likes her big naturals, and so, you know, it's like, it's a tough one, right? They're like butting heads, but they want to be bumping uglies because they're both attracted to each other, and in theory, I like it. I love a good governess story. I love children in romances. Unfortunately, though, this guy just kind of sucks. Like, straight up, he's just not a very good hero. He is way too wishy-washy even after betting our heroine. He's just like, yeah, but like, I'm still not really sure if like this is what I want long term because I was cheated on and I like my job. I don't know if I can commit to you like this. And it was not the vibe. That's not what I'm wanting from a romance hero. Like, sure, it's okay for him to have questions and or not want a relationship at the beginning of the story, but he needs to progress, right? And I don't think he progressed or worked through his trauma very well. And I also don't think Georgina got to work through her trauma very well, right? Like, she had a horrible dad. She is now dealing with a guy who's like kind of in a similar position, like he's also in the military and has strict like military values. She needs to work through that before they like get into a long-term relationship, right? Also, there's not enough like dialogue. It's mostly these people in their heads. It just wasn't my favorite. Ultimately, I give this book 2 stars. So moving on, a book that I found fascinating. I mean, that's just kind of the theme of this whole thing, right? Like, I'm just reading books that are actually kind of interesting and maybe outside of my comfort zone. And while I haven't been super intentional about going outside of my comfort zone this year, that was something that I aimed to do. It's been happening the past couple of months, and like, hats off to me for unintentionally doing that with the lists I guess I'm choosing for list videos. Price of Salt / Carol is a book by, what's her name? Patricia Highsmith? Yes. About 2 characters, Therese and Carol. Carol is a 2015 movie, by the way, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen it because it's a sapphic banger, and this is the book that movie was based on. So this is about Therese and Carol. Therese is a 19-year-old working at a department store in the kind of the Christmas time period until she is able to get kind of a long-term steady job designing sets for plays and shit like that. Trying to make a little extra cash on the side, and while she's there, she ends up meeting an older woman in her 30s named Carol, and Carol's looking for a baby doll for her kid. Doesn't find what she's looking for, or maybe she does. In this encounter, Therese and Carol have this sort of like connection, and they continue to like meet up and or fall in love over the course of the story. And Therese is in the middle of a pretty contentious, nasty divorce. No, not Therese. Carol. Carol's in the middle of a divorce. She's the 30-year-old woman. Right? Anyway, relationship with Therese is kind of fucking things up, and it's an interesting story that I'm not going to spoil for you, you know, in case you haven't seen the movie or you want to read the book. Oh, this was pretty interesting. The beginning was chaotic as fuck. Therese is a weird ass character, and I didn't really understand her at the beginning. As the story continues on, I kind of understood that she had a deep wound from the fact that like her mother wasn't around and didn't care much for her, that she could potentially be taking out in her romantic relationship with Carol, but she also just like is a lover of ladies, so like good for her. I liked more what this book stood for, I guess, is sort of what I want want to say. This is a book that I read for a list video that you're going to see in November. This is a book from the Time list that was circulating for a little while on like Threads. I don't know if y'all have seen it, but it's like Time put together a list of 50 romances spanning from like the 1700s to modern day, kind of exemplify romance and have like done something special in the romance genre. And this book was selected because it's one of the first lesbian pulp novels to have a happy ending and to have two femme characters at its center, amongst other things. It is a pretty important novel. Once I kind of figured those things out and kind of read this book through that lens, I appreciated it even more. I don't think that this is a particularly masterful romance. Like, we're not getting to deeply know these characters. In fact, I think that was the thing that I liked the least about it, was that these two kind of have sex. They don't really talk that much at all. We're just meant to believe that they're having conversations. It's like said on page like, oh, you know, they went to dinner and they talked, but we don't know what they talked about. Wanted to know what they talked about. But for what this was, I did appreciate it. And it's a book that I don't know that I'd rate, but it was a good time. Good time for sure. I did attempt to watch the movie, and there were changes made from the book, but the tone and the vibe, very similar. So if you've watched the movie, I don't think you necessarily need to read the book. The biggest thing that they replaced, I would say, is the set design piece. She like makes little miniatures to being really into photography in the movie, which I don't love. I wanted to see her make the little dioramas, but it's fine. Moving on to Bloodguard. This is a book that I read for that 48 most popular, most anticipated romances of 2024 video. It's about Leith and Maeve. Leith is a guy who is in Gladiator. He is a gladiator. He is trying to win enough competition so that he can become a blood guard, which is a part of the king's, like, you know, special guard who make a lot of money and who are very successful and have like risen through the ranks, get to better their position in society by doing this. So anyway, Leith comes from a foreign land to enter into these competitions to give money back to his sister and mom back home who are sick and aren't vibing and aren't doing very well. He has no other way to make money basically than becoming a blood guard. So this is his final shot. In the process, he ends up meeting Maeve, who is an elven princess going to take over the throne at some point. She needs a king. After a series of events, she's gonna marry this guy. The beginning of this book was really interesting. I loved the idea of a gladiator fantasy romance. Like, that's sick as fuck. We get Leith's point of view very often, which I also thought was really refreshing. The problem is that when the romance picked up, it was very insta-love. Like, we go from having like good conversation, lots of fun, lots of romantic development, bam, we're fucking. And then, oh my god, I profess my love to you. It just didn't feel smart, especially considering that there are more books in this series. Like, I don't know, the pacing really kind of hit a cliff at the 50% mark. So it's like, I don't know what to rate this one. I liked elements of it. Other stuff probably could have been done better. So moving on. Slapshot Surprise by Melanie Harlow. This is a book that I read most recently for the Sports Romance KU video that y'all just saw on Thursday, I believe. It's about Joe and Mabel. Joe is a professional hockey player who meets Mabel on a really turbulent plane ride to Michigan. They're both going for various purposes. I think she is like returning home. Joe's going to a wedding. On this plane trip, she's like so scared of this turbulence that she kind of admits all of her fears and or the things that she hasn't gotten to do. And one of those things is have an orgasm during sex. So Joe's like, she's kind of hot in a nerdy librarian kind of way. Never gonna see her again, but you know, if I ever do, I'd take the opportunity to bone her. And the cool thing is, they end up attending the same wedding and they do get to bone. Less cool is the surprise element of this book, which you might guess, or you might look at the description of it and know going into the book, but I didn't, that this is a surprise pregnancy novel. Yeah. So after a one-night stand, Joe and Mabel are with child. Well, Mabel is physically carrying it, but Joe is informed of the fact that she is pregnant. He's the dad. So elements of this were very realistic. Elements of this were also not romantic. So Joe, throughout the story, is concerned more about his hockey career and what this is going to mean for him than he really cares about Mabel or his future child. And I guess it's kind of realistic. I think a lot of men would probably feel similarly, but I don't want to read a romance that's super realistic in this regard. Like, I don't want him to profess that his love for her immediately, like, yes, it's a one-night stand, but I think more could have been done for him to open up to this idea that he's going to be a dad, this is going to be the mother of his child. Obviously, they're going to ultimately end up together, so why wasn't more work put in for them to know each other, right? It isn't until the end of the book where he finally admits to himself that he loves this woman and that he wants to spend his life with her, and it just felt like too little too late, and also kind of out of nowhere, given his actions leading up to that point. So I wish I could say I loved this, but I certainly did not. I don't know, it's tough because I didn't hate it, but probably like 2 or 3 stars, you know? What I'm finding as I do these videos is that I don't think ratings are super important. I really don't. It's more just about the vibe, you know, and whether or not you want to pick up the book. I don't think that my rating should really determine that. Moving on to The Wingman, which is a hockey romance that I heavily fucked with and give 5 stars. You know, I do occasionally give books 5 stars. This is about Hayden and Darcy. Darcy gets, I'm gonna say she gets dumped. She dumps her boyfriend of 8 years, Kit, who is also a hockey player for a rival hockey team. Hayden, Darcy, and her ex-boyfriend Kit all used to be friends in college, and Kit ends up dating Mabel. Hayden's always kind of carried a little bit of a torch for Darcy, so he jumps on the opportunity when Darcy gets dumped to give her a place to crash. Enlists the help of Hayden to find someone to hook up with, to like be her wingman basically. And over the course of the story, Hayden gets jealous and or admits his feelings for Darcy, and they hook up and have a good time. And it's kind of like, are we really gonna admit our feelings for each other? I don't know. I don't know if it's safe. It was super sweet, super romantic. Both characters have things to work through the book, but it's not overly melodramatic or overly emotional. It really strikes a perfect balance, I think, between characters growing and also like a whole lot of fun. If you're someone who likes a tropey, fanficky feeling romance, I think you're really gonna like this one. It was just picture perfect for me. Okay, loved it. Also loved The Fake Out, which is the second book in the series. Just so good. So moving on to our last sports romance, we've got The Striker, which is about Scarlett and Asher, and this book's by Anna Huang. Just feel like I don't have the best luck with this author. She is no doubt super talented and a lot of people enjoy her stories, but something about her writing doesn't totally land for me. And I think the problem is her books are not super lighthearted and fun like The Wingman was, but they're also not like deeply emotional in the melodramatic way that I want books to be when I'm looking for that, you know? Like that's kind of what I am as a reader. Like I want the two extremes. I want the yearning, the pining, the aching, or I want it to be like fun and like tropey and fanficky. I guess fanficky in different ways on both sides, but these books that Anna Huang writes are like technically good, like on a technical level they are good, but on a connection level, like me with the characters, they're not like, they just don't really work for me. In this book we have Asher, who is a soccer player in the UK, Scarlett is a ballerina, and after Asher gets in a fight with Scarlett's brother, who's also on the team, Scarlett is enlisted to help Asher and Vincent, her brother, kind of, I guess, train, but I just wasn't feeling it. Just wasn't feeling this one. It was also too long, doesn't help, so it's just kind of meh for me, probably like 2 stars. And then the last book is one that I'm currently reading, almost done with, will be done with quickly. It is The Paris Apartment by, don't remember the author's name, but this one. It's about our main characters, Jess and Ben. Jess is going crash with her half-brother after I think she gets like fired from a job. When she gets to this apartment in Paris, Ben is nowhere to be found, and no one in the apartment complex is wanting to give her any answers. People are treating her weird. It's a very weird situation, but she's trying to unfold the secrets of what happened to Ben. And how do I feel about it? I don't know. Honestly, I'm 50-ish% in, maybe a little less than 50% in. I think the vibes are nice and ominous for sure. Like, I keep wondering why no one wants to answer her or help her out, why bad things start happening to her. Like, very curious about it, but I think until the book is over, I'm not going to know entirely how I feel. And I don't like that about mystery thrillers, that like my enjoyment of them hinges on the last couple of chapters, but like that just is what it is with these books. I think that's tough. Those are the 19 books that I read this month. You know, it's been an interesting reading month. I wish that I had more 5 stars. For sure, I think that kind of weak in terms of the 5-star game, but I did read some stuff outside of my comfort zone, which I am very pleased with. Curious to see where the next couple of months take us. Like, I am ramping up the reading big time. I mean, in the past couple of days with my new Kindle, I have been reading honestly like crazy, and I'm actually planning on finishing 3 books today. So I might yet get to 300 books. Wish me luck, my friends. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite books were this month. Love to add a couple to my TBR, mayhaps, since I've got a lot of space, you know, a lot of space open for the rest of the year. But love y'all so much, and I'll see ya in the next one. Bye.